So I have been putting off this part of the series for a couple of reasons. When I started this series, I said that every strategy in here was easy, uh, but this is probably this has to be the one that takes the most work. So when you are writing a test or an assignment, you have at least two jobs. One job is to understand the material and to be able to work through it and get the right answer. But the other one that you don't think about as often is you need to be able to prove to somebody reading your work that you understand what is going on and you know how to get the answer. And sometimes that's the harder of the two. Because remember, if you write a test and I mark it, you are now no longer in the room. I can't ask for any clarification at all. I can't say, what exactly did you mean by this? Or is this an 8 or a 6? So what you put on the page has to speak entirely for itself. So it kind of exists as its own thing, sort of on the page. And so the topic of this video is what to do if your handwriting sucks. Now, obviously, if it's hard to read your handwriting, it's hard for the teacher to mark your work. If they can't tell what you were trying to say, they can't ask you, it will just be wrong. You can't get marks for something the teacher can't read. So by having better handwriting, not only do you make it easier for the teacher to read, you also make it easier for them to give you marks. And also, if you think about it, you have to read your own work. So say I am, working on something and the phone rings or my parents ask for something and I get distracted. If I come back and I can't read what I wrote before, I'm going to have to start that question all over again. So if I can't read my handwriting from that to 3 minutes later, then that's going to be a problem. So here is sort of the quick guide to handwriting, which you might have learned in elementary school, but I know not necessarily everybody did. So when you are drawing, imagine 4 lines across the page. So the most important one is this baseline, which is where all letters sort of rest and sit. So lowercase letters take up half. So that, there's an A, there's a C, there's an E. That wasn't a very good E. Let's try that again. Uppercase letters go up to the top. So there is a D, there is a T, something like that. And letters that go down, like a J or a Y, go down like that. Now, generally, as we get older and we write, we sort of start to cheat things. So, my Y doesn't necessarily go all the way down. That's perfectly fine for a Y. That's perfectly fine for a D. But there's a difference in height. So, let's say, for example, an M should not be the same size as a D. Capital letters should go all the way up to the top. So a capital M should go all the way up to the top, but there should be a difference in size. Now, remember that, numbers count as uppercase. So a 3 is bigger than an A. It works sort of like that. And what you do is then, use those lines, and that's why I always recommend graph paper, because the spacing on the lines of the graph paper is actually closer together than it is on regular lined paper. So if this was how far apart it was on graph paper, it's, maybe that far apart on lined paper. So, this might feel a little bit this might feel a little bit short to squeeze in a 3 and then a teeny tiny X, but on this half spacing, having an X be this size and having a 3 be bigger than that, that's not quite so bad. So all of this stuff is sort of tie in where now the graph paper and the pencil and the tools you use, also having a sharp pencil makes it easier to write, a little bit smaller and fit things in. And I'm not sure why. I've noticed it happening a lot in the last 3 years or so, but I think it's as people are sort of typing and texting more, you sort of forget that the reason that lined paper has lines is you want to use the lines. So for example, this all sits on the same flat line. That's a good expression. This, the way it kind of goes like that, that is, not the sort of thing that you want. It's when it's sort of taking up too much space. And it's, if that was to happen, your work is just going to expand, and you're going to, you won't be able to fit enough questions on a page. Your work is just going to look kind of gross. Now, if you start to write better, it means that you can start to organize your page a little bit better. So let's say I have a margin on my page like this. So when I am writing, the 1 for my question 1 goes there. And maybe say, for example, 1A might look like that. My first line is going to go right there, and the next line is going to go underneath it. Now here, I could put the next line like this, but maybe this line has a Y in it, so maybe it's a little bit further down. And, if my handwriting, like if my 3x is 3 lines high, then leaving this space, I'm not going to have enough paper left. I'm going to get through 5 lines and I'm going to need a new piece of paper. So that doesn't quite work as well. But if I'm writing neat and tidy, that all kind of fits in. And the more you do it, you get a sense of how big your own handwriting is. So say, for example, on the next line, it's going to have a square root sign in it. And because the square root sign has to go over top, so maybe I don't put anything in that space so that I have a square root sign that can go in there, and then underneath I can have something like that. So, but if I'm doing that thing where my writing is starting to go like that, then everything, 1 line worth of work starts going into 3 and 4 and 5 lines worth of space. Where this gets really, really hard to do is the fact that, our favorite variables in the world are X and Y. And there is like one of the most important formulas in grade 9 is a formula that has 2 Y's and a fraction line like that. Looks like that. If you don't know what this formula is doing it, but if you think about it, so I have my how should we think of this? I have the line that's in the graph paper, and then I have my Y, which goes underneath it, but then I have to put a fraction line so that I can have more stuff underneath. So you can already start to see that this is starting to take up an awful lot of space. So if I have messy handwriting, meaning I need big letters to be able to sort of read stuff, then this stuff is just going to grow completely out of proportion. The other thing that I want to just point out is you'll notice that whenever I do lowercase letters, they're always cursive. And so you will have noticed probably, even though they may not have pointed out to you why, when the teachers draw variables. So when they say 3x, they do not write 3x. They write 3 cursive X. I had a teacher that used to do it like this, which I can't do very well. I have a couple of teachers that, but without drawing attention to it, it's always cursive. If you look at the textbook very carefully, when they type the letters, they're not using the regular font. They're using italics for the letters. And the reason for that is because regular print letters half overlap with some of the math symbols. So for example, an X, if you draw it print, would look like a times sign. A T, if you drew it printed, would look like a plus sign. A B, so B would be like that. If you did it printing, in a hurry, that B could look like a 6. Definitely an L could look like a 1. I mean, that could totally happen. Less common, a Q could look like a 9. So getting into the habit of using cursive, not printing, stops those mistakes from happening. Because where this really becomes a problem is if I make a mistake. So usually, if I write a line and the next line I have to come up with by looking at that line, and I can remember what I wrote. I know whether that's a plus sign or a T. And I mean, I'm totally serious. There are a huge number of questions where one of the variables is time. And so being able to tell apart your T's and your plus signs is huge. But let's say I go through, so I write, and somewhere in here is one of those. And I write another step. And I write another step. And I start to realize I've made a mistake. Now, I might be coming back up to this line, a minute later, 2 minutes later. If I can't tell that T apart from a plus sign, I won't know if I've made a mistake. I don't know. Or if I have to go back and say, for example, I erase this and I go back, and if I make that mistake, it's a huge problem. So having better handwriting really, really does help. Now, I have to be very careful when I say this because nobody wants to hear that their handwriting is ugly. So, but if you have a problem with your handwriting, you do not need anyone to tell you. You know. So what I would suggest is make this a problem that you fix completely on your own, privately, and never tell anyone about it. So I will leave a link in the description of a place where you can just make worksheets for yourself. Because, practicing good penmanship, a mix of the cursive and the printing, whatever, is important. But also the thing you'll find when you practice is there are ways that work with how the muscles in your hand are designed to make the writing easier. So for example, and this is my right hand. So if you're looking at this on a screen, this is backwards to you. So if I sort of, turn around me, it is easier to draw lines that go down, pulling, than it is to draw lines that go up, pushing. It is easier to draw lines that go to the left than it is to draw lines that go to the right. So when I'm writing, it is easier to draw the letter E like this, down, over, 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 because that's using pulls, rather than, say, this, which is push. The same thing, people don't draw the letter R with an upstroke, even though that makes it possible to draw in one stroke. We do downstroke, downstroke, downstroke. Although somehow that wound up looking like a worse R. This is what happens when you think about it too much like that. So by getting into the habit of drawing it, it makes the letters come out nicer because muscles in your hand that move one way are stronger than the muscles that move the other way. And people have actually worked this out. And so if you grew up and all they wanted you to do was get the shape of the letter right, then to draw an F like this makes sense, even though it's easier to go that way and you get a tidier F. So changing those habits makes it easier and gets us into that process of where you can sort of make the handwriting smaller. So I will leave the resources in the description. Don't, if you watch this and you thought, this totally was about me, just don't tell anyone about it. Privately, go do a little practice, deal with it, and think of it as just something to make your life easier. Because, most subjects now, if your handwriting is a mess, you can switch to typing. Book reports, essays, PowerPoint presentations, you switch. Math doesn't work because, all of the symbols with things inside. I mean, the fact that, you can have both a small number and a small number on the bottom and a small number on the top. You're never going to get, not in the next 10 years, you're not going to get a keyboard that can do that. It has to be handwriting for that to work. Hopefully you can do that, and hopefully it just starts to make your life a little bit easier, and we'll do sort of, a more cheerful thing next time. But good luck.